readers. Trisha Goyer here, and I have a familiar face today, Gillian Bronte Adams, and we talked last year about her book of Fire and Ash, and you want to hold it up so they can see, and I lent my copy out. So I'm like, here, you need to read this book. So my son has it, but we are having Gillian back because it won Book of the Year at the Realm Makers Conference. So they have categories and they have the winners of each category. So she won in her category, and then out of all the books at the conference, hers won as Book of the Year. So congratulations.
Thank you. It's totally blown away. It's a cool moment.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, we're going to talk about that moment in a second, but just for those who may not have watched other videos or aren't familiar with you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Gillian Bronte Adams. I write young adult epic fantasy. I love animals and spent, 11 years working professionally with horses at a Christian youth camp. So horses are a big part of my life and factor a lot into this book.
Yeah.
I think what else to tell you about myself. I occasionally get to narrate audiobooks, which is super fun because I love reading books and I just get to read them out loud to other people. So that's me in a nutshell.
I love it. Okay, let's go back to that moment. So the award ceremonies are just weird anyway. That you're there and you're like, I hope I win, but then if I win, there's all these expectations and I'm gonna have to do something. I don't know. So tell us about the moment and the award ceremony.
Yeah, it was really a crazy moment. So I was thrilled to be there, was sitting with friends, just having an awesome time. And then saw that my book had finaled for Book of the Year and was just completely blown away and was quite literally left speechless. So I think I got up there and gave the shortest acceptance speech in the history of acceptance speeches. But it just was the coolest thing. And really, I think what meant the most to me is just realizing afterwards, getting to talk with people and hearing from them just how much this book has meant to them and how they connected with the characters, and particularly with Caradwyn, the main character in the story, just how much she had encouraged them personally. And that was so cool and just came out of that, moment out of the book winning the award. Had the opportunity to hear from readers like that. So
I love that. And that's so cool because you knew it was nominated for another category.
I did, yes.
It's not until you're there sitting, there's hundreds of people, I don't even know how many hundreds of people were there, but it's not there until that moment that you realize oh, it's one of the nominees for the Book of the Year.
Yeah. I was not expecting that. And just literally every thought and word went out of my head from that moment on.
I bet. Yeah. It's a good problem to have though.
Yes.
And Diana and Janet and other friends are saying hi. So hello friends. Okay, so tell us, for those who maybe didn't catch the last video, a little bit about the book, but I also want to hear about your other series too, which just sounds amazing. So tell us a little bit about A Fire and Ash, and then let's talk about your other series too.
Okay, yeah. So Fire and Ash is a young adult epic fantasy. It's set in a kingdom where warriors ride to battle on magical war horses. So horses that can breathe fire, that can summon storm winds, that can kind of vanish into shadow like ninja horses. It's so cool, right? It follows an exiled heir, a reluctant rebel, and a novice priest as they're fighting against this hidden power that's trying to take over their world. And this first book really kind of centers on Caradwyn's story. She's the exiled heir. She's been outcast by her father after this tragic accident that claimed the life of her brother. And kind of on the heels of that, she's out in the wilds of her kingdom, just trying to protect her people and keep them safe, protect the borders of the kingdom from threats, and really just kind of spend her life in service for her people. When she's the one who discovers that there's this terrible threat that's literally landing on the shores of her kingdom, and she has to go home to break her exile, go back to her father, and deliver the news that there's this terrible threat and try to muster the kingdom to face it. So that is where the story picks up. And it just really focuses on her journey as she's kind of overcoming this terrible event that's happened in her past and learning how to step up and be the leader that her people need. It's got lots of action and adventure and exciting things too.
exciting things right from the
Yeah.
beginning. There's oh, your just heart's broken. I won't give much away, but I love it. Jamie Jo Wright said, "Ninja horses, you had me at ninja horses."
Yes, exactly.
So great. And then Diana said, "Oh wow, sounds like an awesome book." Oh, and so here's a question. We'll just jump into it, Morgan,
Okay.
since you're here. It's Morgan said, "What's your advice for an author of a non spec genre wanting to write an young adult epic fantasy trilogy? Did you start out writing young adult fantasy?" And Morgan, I told Gillian before we started, I'm like, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about epic fantasies
Mhm.
and like why youth love them and all about them. So your question leads perfectly to where I want to go. So what advice do you have if someone is interested in writing in that genre? And then also I'll tack on to that question, like why epic fantasy? Because I know young people today, and I'm not just talking like teenagers, young people, teens, 20s, 30s. I mean, I'm 51 and uh, love epic fantasy. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I think first, just in terms of advice, I would encourage you just to read a ton of young adult epic fantasy. Like if that's what you're wanting to write, you're going to learn a lot about how to do that just by reading the books that are out there, seeing what the readers, what teens are really enjoying in the books. And that'll be just really helpful as you're trying to kind of jump into something that's a little bit new.
And it's really like thinking big picture.
Yeah,
So, I mean, because this is of the first in a series, right?
it is.
There's you have
Yes.
another one. So you're following these characters through pages and pages, and it's also building a lot of characters. So even you have the horse characters that you're building characterization in the horses too. So it's not like I think it's some books that are like shorter. It's going to be like right from the beginning, you might have two or three characters, and it's going to be like action packed, and we're going to move. Well, this is going to be kind of the world building, character building, because we know we're following them on a long journey. I guess that's the epic word, right?
Yeah, yeah. So with epic fantasy, one of the things that I think really draws readers to that is just the world building in and of itself. They want to be like fully immersed in a different culture, in a new setting, and in something that's just like wonderful and awe-inspiring and magical. And the cool thing about epic fantasy, they tend to be a little bit bigger books, and that's because you
Mhm.
get to see a lot of that world over the course of the book and then over the course of an epic series that a lot of times is spanning continents,
Yeah,
lots of different kingdoms, and yes, getting to see and meet a lot of different characters who are kind of introducing you to those kingdoms, um,
yeah.
which is really cool.
Good. Yeah, and so you talked about like people are loving just that world building and getting into that. And I know like my young adult sons, especially my teen daughter, they love the books are like this big. And when people say like kids or teens or young adults aren't reading anymore, I'm like, are you joking me? Because not only are they reading, they like these are big, big books, and they're not scared by them. So
Hmm.
why do you think like what they're interested kind of in this genre now in a world where it seems like there's social media and there's like short little videos and stuff? Why do you think they are gravitating towards these epic novels?
That's a great question. And sometimes,
I'm sure
like
you have all the answers.
when you're writing the novel, it can feel like you're trying to compete with this world that moves very, very fast with social
Yeah.
media, and with like videos that are happening in 30 seconds, and you're like, okay, I'm
Mhm.
trying to like get people to commit to a really big book. But I think the draw of books that are that large is it is just so immersive. It
Mhm.
pulls you away from just that fast moving world that we live in,
Mhm.
and introduces you to a different time and a different place, into you know people who maybe think and act differently than you do. And it's really just fascinating to me how that does work. Um, Kind of lost my train of thought there for a second.
Okay.
So my dog came over to say hi and distracted me.
You're like, "Wait, dog." Yeah, and I totally think that it does like, there's so much going on in the world today, like, sitting down with a book and just enjoying a book or
Mm,
enjoying the audiobook, it does like, you get to escape from all the just fast-paced pictures, short
Yeah,
videos, all the things going YouTube, I mean, all the things going on, and it does kinda take you into another world that's interesting, and
yeah,
but then there's, like, heroes and villains, and you can see battles, and there's horses that are in flames, and all these sort of things going on. It's just, like, fun and
it
exciting,
is.
and
It is.
I wanted to mention too, so if you have someone in their teens or 20s that love to read and love these books, these would be perfect Christmas gifts. Just telling you right now to check out those books. Okay, so the other question is, did it take you long to build your series, and how did you approach that?
That's a great question. It did take me a little while to world build this series, and part of that's just because this story came together in kind of an unusual way. I had the idea for the world and for the story completely separately, which is not
Mm,
usually how I get my ideas. So I was working part time at a summer camp, just kind of managing their horse program when I had the idea for the magical horses that are in this story. And it just, was totally infused and inspired by the things that I was doing every single day, out in the
yeah,
saddle, teaching kids to ride, literally on my feet all day long.
yeah,
And it just kind of, built this culture and this world where people are doing that, but with magical war horses, which was super fun. And I loved the setting. Couldn't wait to write it, but did not have a story for this world. And I knew
yeah,
that it would have to be a really epic story for the world that I
yeah.
was creating. And it wasn't until months later that I actually came back to an idea that I'd had before and set aside. And that was Carradwin's story, this story of this kind of,
Mm,
exiled daughter of a king who has to kind of step back in and try to save her kingdom. And that story I just put on the back burner because it didn't have a cool world that it was happening in.
that's so cool.
Um,
And all of a sudden, like the moment hits you,
yeah,
and you're like,
wait.
world, character, let's put these together.
And once I threw them together, like it completely changed everything. It was so much more epic than either of those ideas would have been separately. But it still took some time to kind of do the world building, to ask the questions, to think about,
Mhm.
okay, what would it actually mean for a culture to be built around, these magical war horses? How would that affect the way they think about things? How would that affect the way they live their lives? And just all of those delicious questions that you get to ask when you're building an entire culture. And so that took another couple of years. And it was about probably, I think, 9 to 10 years from the first story idea until the book was actually like finished and sent off to my
Really?
publisher. So,
So did you work on your other books? There's a question here that says, "What are some of your favorite young adult epic fantasy novels released?" So we'll talk about maybe some you've read, but
mhm.
before we talk to some that you've read, let's talk about other ones you've written. So
Yeah.
this would tie in there. So the Songkeeper Chronicles,
Mhm.
do you have those you could hold up and
I do,
show?
yes. So this is my other series that I've written. This is the Songkeeper Chronicles. There are 3 books in it, and it's a little bit less epic fantasy than a
Mhm.
Fire and Ash, more just kind of like classic high fantasy feel to it. The first book is Orphan Song, and this one is set in a place where music is the magic system. And so the
Mm.
main female character discovers that she can hear a song that nobody else can, which draws the attention of the warlord who's ruling her country and sets her basically on his radar and off on the run, trying to escape from him with a
Mhm.
Scottish peddler and a streetwise thief and a bunch of fantasy creatures. So, kind of your first book, at least, is like your typical kind of quest adventure format, and
Yeah.
was just super, super fun to write. Get to bring in lots of fantastical creatures, which is my favorite thing.
Yes.
So,
Yes. I love it. Yeah, what's the other ones in the series?
yeah,
So
so book 2 is Songkeeper, I'll show you, and then book 3 has one of my favorite covers, and that's Song of Lyra.
I know
Um,
just looking at the covers, like, if you have family members or if you love fantasy, like the eagle and the creature, I mean, those are some really cool creatures that are on there. I know family members that would just be drawn to that. So putting this in my mind for Christmas gifts too. But I love that, you have the creatures and then the various characters. It seems like with all your books, let's pull in this character from kind of this area and this character here, and then you're merging them together, which is
Mhm.
always such a fun dynamic for books when you have these multiple point of views and different characters and their different goals, and then them coming together just makes for fun books to read.
It does. I think one of my favorite things to do is just pull together characters who are very unlike each other and throw them into dangerous situations or off on like road trips. But it's medieval era fiction, so not in cars,
Yeah,
walking road trips, and just watch the disaster unfold because it's fun.
yeah, and that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
For our poor characters, we have to get them in as much problems as possible.
Yeah.
Jamie Joe said, "Are there ninja creatures in those too?" So
No ninja creatures, unfortunately, but there's
they look pretty cool
griffins.
though.
Yeah, there's this cool guy who's like a unicorn, but with like deer antlers. Um, yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so what are some books that you've enjoyed also that would be like either high fantasy or epic fantasy or any other kind of fantasy or young adult that they really like?
Yeah. So let's see. I love these questions. Some of my favorite fantasy books doing I know this is a part of the avid readers of Christian fiction. Can I
Yeah,
mention non-Christian fiction also, or just
you can throw them out
throw
there.
them out
So yeah,
there? Okay,
if you
just
talk about
to
Christian ones would be great, but yeah,
yeah, I'll throw some in too. So one of my favorite authors of all time is Brandon Sanderson.
I knew you were going to mention him
I couldn't
because
not mention him.
that my sons I think have gone through his books multiple times and they're like so big. Yeah.
They're definitely on the epic side. So if you really enjoy epic fantasy, he is definitely a fantastic one. So his books are amazing. They're not his epic fantasies are not young adult
Mhm.
fantasy, but they are really really cool and really amazing. I have recently really enjoyed this one again, isn't epic fantasy, but Dust by Kara Swanson, which
Yes.
I know you guys have heard about her before.
Yeah.
But
Dust
that
and
one is
Shadow are
they're
excellent.
so amazing. Love those for sure. I actually got to narrate the audiobooks for the series that I'm going to mention next, which is really fun. So the Blood of Kings trilogy by Jill Williamson is kind of a young adult, kind of borderline.
And I bought those. I bought the first one on audiobook, and I'm listening to it, and it says narrated by Gillian and Bronte Adams. I'm like, wait, I know her. This is so cool. So I love that you narrated A Fire and Ash, and then you narrated also Jill's books too. So
Mhm.
so cool.
Definitely fun. So those are really, really good. And I'm like running blank on books all of a sudden because I'm not sitting in front of my bookshelves,
Yeah.
which is
Morgan
unfortunate.
Betsy's
But
Secrets of the Mist is really good. Have you read that yet?
I have not read that one
Oh,
yet,
yeah.
unfortunately.
So
But
it's like
it has
steampunk
also
with like
won a bunch of
zombies.
awards and is awesome.
Jamie Joe, right. You have to go get, I'm telling you right now, Jamie, you have to go get Secrets of the Mist because they're called the undead, but they're zombies. And it's a steampunk thing, and there's a mist on the ground, and there's divers that go down the mist to retrieve things. Anyway, it's a really cool book too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Mariah said, I'm gonna jump in here real quick. What is the age range for your books? Is it young adult or either?
Yeah, great question. So A Fire and Ash is young adult epic fantasy. The way that it's written, I have a lot of adult readers too, but it's just not, it's, I'm trying to think of the word I want to use. It's age appropriate for young adult readers. And that's kind of the age range that it's geared towards. The Songkeeper Chronicles, when it was published, my publisher didn't have a YA imprint. So it was published just as a fantasy series, but the characters are younger, and most of my readers who read it are in their teens. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so that's what I love about Christian fiction that's young adult fantasy. Like you can still, if you're older, like I said, I'm 51. If you're older, you can still read and enjoy these books, but they're just going to be super clean. Like
Mhm.
there's not going to be anything inappropriate, whether it's language or even the violence. I mean, there's action, but it's not like so gory you can't read it. Or there's not going to be sex scenes or any of those types of things. It's very appropriate. So you can totally hand it to your 12-year-old and not feel like, oh my goodness, I shouldn't let him or her read that book. It's appropriate, but there's enough with the characterization and the creatures and the characters that there's enough going on that from 12 up, you're going to be able to, be interested and intrigued through the
Hmm.
story.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, and Mariah says, yes, and I love reading young
Yeah,
adult
me
books.
too. Me too. Oh, while I'm
Yeah.
thinking of it, I just had one more book pop in mind that I'm gonna pitch to you guys real quick.
Yeah.
Um, one more young adult fantasy book. So again, not quite epic fantasy, but it is an awesome epic adventure, and that's Winter, White, and Wicked by Shan Didamore. And it's
Ooh, I've heard
Yes,
of
it's got the
them.
most gorgeous cover. So you need to look up online and see the cover. And it's basically, she pitches it as like Mad Max meets Frozen, which is
Uh,
just kind of a fun concept. But it's like ice truckers and an island that's trapped by winter, who's this like vengeful winter spirit, and it's super cool. And there are rebels, which I love. So that's another
that is so
another great
cool.
one.
I love it. All right, so another question that popped up is, was the writing process very different with your series? So this book, the A Fire of Ash is also part of a series too, but was
Mhm.
it different when you wrote your first series compared to this, the new series?
Yes. I feel like my writing process changes a little bit each time with each new project that I tackle, just because um, each one has new challenges and new things for me
Mhm.
to learn, and is forcing me to kind of grow and expand in different ways. I think A Fire and Ash is definitely the book that I've like thought about and spent the most time building
Mhm.
towards before I actually started writing it, which was just a little bit different and a little challenging at times, because there were times when I wondered if I'd forgotten how to write. And then it all came together, and it's just a part of the process. So this one, when I look at it and just think about the growth that I went through as a writer,
Mhm.
um, over the years, that I was working on it, it's kind of cool to see that and see how it
That is
affected
so
me.
cool. So you were thinking through Fire and Ash and all those characters. Those were kind of in your mind even as you were writing this different series.
They were, yes. So I kept kind of like putting them on the back burner so I could focus on the Songkeeper Chronicles, and just kind of kept coming back to it whenever I had a spare moment.
Yeah.
Which was fun.
That's so cool. Okay, so you have book 2 after A Fire and Ash comes out next year. Are there
Yes.
other books that you have those ideas floating around in your head?
There is, yes. So the Fireborn Epic, this is going to be a 3-book series.
Okay.
So book 2 is coming out next year. I have book 3 like in my head, but I do have another kind of story idea that's been floating around probably for about 5 years now, and I just keep kind of like coming back to it, and um, I think that's going to be what I write next, and it's very different from anything else I've written before, so it'll be fun
And it's
and
so
a
funny. It's
challenge.
like people maybe who don't write, like, yes, we just have these ideas and they'll pop up and we'll think about it. Then it's like, nope, it's not your turn yet. Like you have to
You
go.
gotta wait.
It's almost like a classroom. They're like, you have to go sit down. It's not your turn. We'll get to you. But right
Yeah.
now, this is the focus.
Yeah. The funny thing is, like, so this idea that I can't wait to write, it's a little bit of a historical fantasy. So
Ooh.
can be so much fun. Definitely requires a lot of research. And was back before this book came out. So it was on submission, out with publishers. And I was kind of just waiting and seeing. And I was like, well, now's the time. I'm going to dive in. I'm going to do all my research. And literally, right as I was like coming home with all of my library books and about to dive into all of it, we signed the contract on this one. I was like, okay, gotta switch focus again.
It's
Back
like
to the series.
library return
Here
all
you
the
go.
books to the library.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like I got to
I
save
love
all those
that.
titles, come back
Yeah,
to them later.
exactly. And like, yeah, remember because the library kind of gets rid of books sometimes too. You have to go find them again.
Mhm.
Morgan said, "My story ideas tap me on the shoulder and can get pretty persistent." Yes, they can.
Yeah. They're like, don't forget about
Yeah,
me. Still here.
yeah. That's what I love when people say like, "Oh, how many books are you working on at once?" We're like, "Do you mean just writing?" Because there's a lot more going on up here.
Hmm.
Oh, so good. All right, so there's another question. I'll make sure I get all these questions. Okay. Did you pitch your pitch at a conference? to sign with the publisher, or was it through an email or a query? Someone asked.
Great question. So for my first book I ever published, which was Orphan Song, I did pitch this one at a conference. And then it was kind of at a weird time where the publishing house that I pitched it to was in the middle of kind of like switching to new people. So I pitched it to one person and it was sitting on his desk. And then Steve Lobby came in and took over Enclave Publishing. And he found the manuscript basically like just in the submission pile and ended up picking it up at that point. So I didn't pitch it to him directly, but I did pitch it at a conference.
Pitch it to someone that's put it on their desk.
Yeah, got it into the place. And then Fire and Ash was through just a proposal that my agent sent out, and that's how it got signed.
Yeah, and that's the fun thing, that even if we have these wonderful ideas, it's always waiting to see like, oh, is a publisher going to be interested in this idea at this time? And like you said, that one was going out, your one you hoped right next was going out, but it's like, okay, well, we can't do that now. So it'll go out again at another time. But it's always not only do writers have to come up with the ideas, have to, think of it and build enough of the world and the chapters to submit it, to send it out there. But then it's like, what's happening at the publishing house? Are they full with the numbers of the authors that they already have? Are they committed to series from different people? It's like this whole shift. And so really, I mean, and I think you would agree, it's just God's timing that things happen. So that's the other question I want to ask. How has your spiritual journey been as you're working on these books, and just as you're a writer? How is the spiritual journey for yourself then?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that, actually. I've been thinking about that a lot lately as I've been writing. And it's really fascinating to me how a lot of times the books that I'm writing at the time actually end up kind of rubbing against things that I need to be working on and learning myself. And that the Lord is like kind of really working on in my life and teaching me. And that can be really challenging because you're creating in the middle of like the Lord also being like, okay, but I'm trying to teach you this thing so that you can also then, have that in your book and be encouraging others. And that's really been my last year as I've been working on the sequel to Of Fire and Ash, and just didn't plan it this way, kind of already had like an idea of what the characters' journeys were going to be and what they were going to be experiencing. And then all of a sudden looked up and was like, wait a second, why am I going through this too? Like, I just wanted my characters to have to deal with this. Like, I didn't want to have to face this myself. And it's humorous at times because I'm like, okay, well, I know what I'm not going to be writing in any of my upcoming books. But it also, like, as I've been kind of like walking through some of the challenges that my characters have been facing, have just really felt the Lord growing me in my trust in him and kind of showing me areas where I kind of can put my identity in my writing and in the things that I do, and how that is not actually who I am. That's not my identity. My identity comes from him, and from his love for me. And when I'm rooted in that, that's when the work that I do can actually be impactful and meaningful to people, because it's not coming from me, it's coming from him. So that's been this past year and the book that I'm working on right now. And it's just, I think it's really cool that as Christian writers, we do get to kind of like walk through these spiritual journeys sometimes with our characters and get to see the answers that the Lord is bringing to fruit and to life in our own lives, even as we kind of get to record some of that on the page. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that, like, I feel like the books are for people out there, but the book writing process is for us. Like, God is working in us and changing us. And I'm like, oh, the same with you. Like, why did I have my character go through this issue? Because, like, or near deadline, like, there's always something that'll go, like, major things will happen near deadline. And I'm like, of course. I'm trying to finish this book, like all this opposition, because we are
Mhm.
sending hope and God's messages and truth out there, and there's going to be opposition. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it shouldn't be surprising, and
it
yet
shouldn't be
somehow I'm always surprised, and I'm
I
like,
know.
"Wait, no. Why isn't this easier?" Um,
Yeah, good. Okay. So the other question that I told you I wanted to ask too, or we want to talk about, is narrating audiobooks. And we have the question out there. So how did you get into narrating audiobooks?
Yes. Okay, so weirdly, it was something that I always wanted to do. Um, just always loved the idea of it, thought it would be super cool. Did a ton of like reading aloud for like my family as a
Yeah.
kid on car trips and whatnot, and just absolutely loved it.
So
So
basically you're on a trip and they're like, here, read to
read
us.
to us. Yeah, me and my sister, we would like trade off and do the voices, and it was so much fun. Redwall, so many opportunities for character voices.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so always loved it. Always just loved the idea of maybe like doing audiobook narration one day. And out of the blue, saw that my friend Gillian Williamson was hosting an audition for some audiobooks that she was wanting to produce. So kind of like on a whim, jumped into it, recorded an audition, and was like, we'll see what happens. She ended up really liking it, and I realized at that point that I had to learn how to narrate audiobooks and how to do
Yeah.
everything that goes with that. Because when you're narrating on your own, you do all of the editing, all of the audio mastering, and making it into something that people can actually then listen to. So it was so much fun. Definitely bit off more than I could chew with the first book and learned so
Yeah.
much in the process. But each one that I did got a lot easier and just felt so much more natural. And I was just really grateful to Jill for giving me that opportunity and letting me do her books, her Blood of Kings trilogy. And then because I had done those, kind of through a crazy turn of events, was given the opportunity to read A Fire and Ash and record it at the Oasis Audio Studio. And that was,
That is so cool. Isn't that like, are you like, is this really
I
happening right
know.
now?
It totally blew me away. Like I was not expecting for that to be a thing. Just because the timing of when the book was coming out and everything, it just didn't seem like it was going to be something that would work out. And then just the Lord kind of gave me this wonderful gift. It was like, here, you get to read your own book. And that was
That
the
is
coolest
cool.
experience ever. And the team up there is absolutely amazing. And I literally got to just sit in a booth and read my book. And it was so much fun.
That is awesome. And I've listened to it and you did a great job. Because
Oh, thank
there's like
you.
there is like different voices and there's of course you know how to pronounce your character's name. So it's easy. But
That is the advantage of having the author narrate when it's epic fantasy.
yeah, exactly. 'Cause they're like when I was reading it, I'm like, how do you pronounce this? And then I listened to the
Mhm.
audiobook, like, oh, okay. That's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, yeah. Way back when I like had this vision of including like a pronunciation guide in the book itself, and then just over the process of the busyness of author life, did not get one into the book.
Yeah.
But now that the audiobook's out, I'm like, yes, now you
Now
guys,
is it.
now
There it
you
is.
know.
Yeah. Oh, that's so
Oh,
cool. I just love like these little glimpses of, oh, maybe someday, or this would be so cool how God's just like, here, this is
mhm.
just an extra bonus for you, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so cool that all and for you to be able to read Jill's books and I just love that so much. And just this whole journey is so much about just God working in us and through us. And then you hear from readers and they're like, wow,
Mhm.
this helped me so much. And it's just so cool that we get to be part of that journey.
Yeah, it really is. It's really neat.
Cool. All right. So for those who are interested in connecting with you online or any of your books, where can they go to get more information?
Yes. So my website is a great place, JillianBronteAdams.com. You can find all my books there and like link to sign up for my newsletter. I also love interacting with readers on Instagram. I've been on a little bit of a social media hiatus because I am on deadline
Yeah.
and we'll be turning in my book in a couple of days. So and
Well, it's so
sit
awesome that you
down, really
stop
focused.
when you're turning in your book in a couple of days.
But Yes, I do love interacting with readers on Instagram, and that's one of my favorite places. So
Awesome. Well,
yeah,
Julian, it's so great to connect with you again, and thank you for being here.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun.